Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. If you're just joining us, in the last couple of episodes, we discussed what feedback is and why it's so important. So if you haven't listened to those, highly recommend going back and listening to those and meeting us back here. But this time we'll talk about the practical steps in implementing a feedback culture in organizations. So thank you for joining us again, Debbie and Roy. To start us off today, what are some of those first steps an organization should take to begin implementing, this positive feedback culture?
Sounds like an easy question, but it's not.
It's not.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing I think about is that sometimes organizations or leaders in organizations may say that this is what it is that they want. But they may not really meet it. So the first thing is identifying what are those values and those behaviors that are really important to us, and how does that fit into a feedback system, and then really taking an honest assessment of where your culture currently is. What are we showing are our values related to that? To get a lay of the land, to find out the amount of work, the support, the resources, the professional development that's going to be needed. But first is I think you have to identify that it's something that you really want and that you're in it for the long haul. And then the second is do an assessment, whether that's you do it yourself with focus groups or surveys or whatever tool you want to use, or you hire somebody to come in and interview folks.
Yeah, I think in most cases, unless you have a change in leadership, a senior leader decides to come in and this is the culture that they're trying to create, you're often going to need to bring somebody in from the outside to help build and understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish and the best way to accomplish it. I know that from a leadership perspective, I've had an opportunity to do some leadership development with some organizations across the country, and we've done kind of assessments to start with, line level personnel. Where are they at? What are they thinking about? What's important to them? And to Debbie's point, I can think of a few where we had briefings with the senior executives that brought us in to conduct the surveys, that when they heard what was going on, they were pretty much done. They didn't want anybody's feedback anymore. They just wanted to go back and do what they were already doing. And I think, feedback can happen at all levels of the organization. Leadership, for example, isn't a title. It's not a position. It's not a corner office. Most often, your most influential leaders are people with no rank or no, fancy position title. So you can give and provide feedback and create those opportunities for it. But unless an organization is truly ready for that kind of substantial change, it's probably not going to happen. So again, as we said right when you started this episode, sounds easy, but it's probably not.
Absolutely. So kind of going along with that first question, what are some of the most common barriers to implementing a feedback culture, and how can they be overcome?
Ooh.
One of the things
another hard one.
Yeah. I think about first and that comes to mind is this fear of consequences. Retaliation, that if I really provide, evidence, my experience, if I am honest with the feedback that I give, will that have an impact on my ability to move in this organization?
Yeah, I think finding those opportunities to give feedback in a positive sense where, I've heard this joke a whole bunch of times in my life, but if you have a leader or someone in a position of authority that is adverse to change, trying to help them understand or come up with an idea that you let them take credit for, that maybe provides that first opportunity for, hey, there's some good ideas. Frankly, I would say that the biggest barrier to implementing a feedback culture is ego. whether that be all the way at the top or somebody in the middle. Again, I know I read a couple of books during the first two episodes, but Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy, is a phenomenal book. We all have egos at different levels, and being able to put that ego aside to get feedback. And again, going back to our first episode, separating feedback from criticism. They are different things, and sometimes people misunderstand that. I certainly, as a young police officer, uh, had moments too often where I was super critical of management and leadership because I didn't like what they were doing. I didn't like their policies. I didn't, pick a topic. And it wasn't long after I got promoted a few times that I realized I'm not nearly as smart as I thought I was. And sometimes we find ourselves in that situation as well.
It's feedback or any kind of change that's being talked about, thought about, implemented in an organization. There's always going to be folks that have this fear of change, that don't want to change. The ones that will say, you know what, I've been here for 25 years and I've seen people come and go that have tried to make all these changes. I can wait you out too, right? And then the other that I often see when it is the professional development, the training, the supports that people need in order to be able to do things well when it is that a change is occurring. So it's not just when I think about feedback, it's not just talking with people or training people or giving people experiences and practice in how you give feedback, but also how you receive it. And what you do with that information after you've gotten it. So those are two other places that I think can really um, really throw up some roadblocks to implementing.
Another great book to your point about what to do with feedback or how to use feedback effectively. Sheila Heen and Doug Stone wrote a book called Thanks for the Feedback, and they really take a deep dive in how to get and use feedback. And to that point, I think anyone who wants to improve at anything, whether it's, again, being a partner, a spouse, a parent, whether it's something professional, you want to achieve the next level at whatever organization you're working at, even if the culture of the organization doesn't provide high levels of feedback, that doesn't mean you can't connect with people and ask for feedback from individuals that are in positions that you may want to achieve one day or that have a series of skills, certainly from an experience standpoint. I would encourage all your listeners, whatever it is that you want to do better in life, find a mentor, find someone that you can reach out to give you that feedback, that honest, open feedback. It's important.
Absolutely. And sort of extending that question, do you think that newer technological tools can be leveraged to kind of facilitate this process, or do you think it's a hindrance?
Yes. I think it can be both.
Both.
I think the reality becomes there are a ton of tools, many of them web-based, that find opportunities and basically force feedback. But it's all about communication. A lot of the feedback that we're talking about for improvement, really, those are one-on-one conversations, as we've discussed earlier, right? So it's not just the feedback in the online survey or hey, an attaboy that a system sends you when something goes right or you hit some metric. The true improvement feedback is, I think, always going to be personal. It's always going to be.
One of the things that I think about are the recordings that we do of the teachbacks in the IDW courses. So there's this combination of you receive feedback from the group of folks that are in the teach back room with you, as well as the IDW instructor. And then you also have the video that you can watch afterwards, which more often than not validates what it is that you receive for feedback from your peers. That's one thing I think about. Years ago, gosh, it almost feels like another lifetime now, but I took a course called cognitive coaching. And one of the things that they would have us do is actually record our sessions. Now, of course, you have to say, you know what, Ashley, when you come in for this coaching session or this feedback session, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind if I was going to be recording this. And I'm recording it because I want to know how I'm doing, and I want to know how I'm going to do better at it. And so during this course, you were taking recordings of having recordings of yourself, and then going back and listening to them and identifying those places where it is that you might be able to make some changes, as well as your instructors were listening to them as well. I also think about things like evaluations in or surveys that can go out to get information from people related to how is the feedback process going? What have you gained from it? But simple tools, things that might not take long.
Kind of to wrap up this series and this episode, all of this is great, but how do we evaluate it going forward? So how can the effectiveness of a feedback culture be measured over time?
Long list of things that could be done. And when it is that you're thinking about creating a system of feedback in your organization, that's one of the first things you should be talking about. How are we going to know that we got there? And the things that I think about are, what are those behavior changes that I would expect to see when it is that we've met our target, where it is that feedback is the norm? What are those things that I would expect to see? Would I be seeing people talking over by the water cooler, and they might be sharing, oh, when you did XYZ, right? So what are the conversations that are occurring, not just in the office setting, behind closed doors, but in the general areas where it is that you see people? I also think about using performance data. So, if indeed you are doing the performance evaluations, what are you noticing in relation to those? Is there an increase in the amount of improvement that people are making over short periods of time? What is going on with professional development? And what is it that people are asking for? Are there patterns? Are there themes related to things that they're asking for? And I also think about the importance of, whether it's a focus group, getting people together in groups. How is it going? Running, exit interviews, but they're really stay interviews, right? Just calling people in over time to say, how is it going? What should we be doing differently? What have you noticed that is different?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of qualitative and quantitative metrics that we can put in place, but all of Debbie's points, and we talked about this in a previous episode, really have to start with what the goal is. What is the goal for trying to implement this high feedback culture in an organization? At the organization I work at now, we actually do 30 and 60 day 90, 30, 60 and 90 day questionnaires, if you will, for new team members when they get onboarded. And the information that we get back is fascinating in those. A couple of simple questions. Have you met with management? Are you thinking about leaving the company? How do you like your team? And we get some really interesting feedback, and that's done not completely anonymously, but pretty anonymously. And it goes to the human resources department before it comes to anybody else. And then the ones that have, positive or critical feedback, it gets sent out to the department directors to deal with. Those are super helpful as we kind of grow an organization. At the end of the day, I think you're going to know if you were successful based on what the conversations look like in and around the agency, in the elevator. Debbie said the water cooler. I think turnover rate is another just quantitative data point that you can look at. You're gonna see, hopefully, in a high feedback organization where feedback isn't just feedback, where feedback is being used appropriately, you're going to have engaged employees. You're going to have reduced turnover, which I think most companies would love to have. Turnover is really, really expensive, both from an experience standpoint and a monetary standpoint. So I think anyone in a leadership position of any kind of organization that doesn't have a high feedback culture should really take a step back and see if that's something that is for them and figure out how to implement that.
Another thing that I was just thinking about in terms of how do you know what it is that you're, it makes me think about some conversations that have come, organically in talking with NCBRT instructors in different disciplines. And they say that the difference in working at NCBRT is the support, is the feedback, is the support around continuous improvement. So you can be going for a job interview. You could be sitting on an interview team and somebody come in for an interview to your organization, and you can hear sometimes, why are you interested? Well, I understand by talking with, several people. So it's in unlikely places that I think that you can find out if it's working. And I think there's just an incredible benefit to everyone in the organization when leadership is thoughtful about how it is that they set this up and how it is that they're going to sustain it over time.
Thank you so much for joining us for this series. Really appreciate it having you both on, Debi for the first time and Roy after many, many times. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you so much. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.